So first and foremost, we need to acknowledge and recognize that one of the founding principles of the European Union is that of the respect of democracy and, of course, fundamental rights of citizens. And democracy depends on a variety of things, be it freedom of speech, independence of the judiciary, respect for individual human rights, but above all, it depends very much on the respect of the rule of law. And that is why the rule of law has become such a target for those who wish to undermine our democracy, because it is part of the playbook, the authoritarian playbook, to attack and undermine the rule of law in an effort to compromise democracy at large. And we have seen that play out in our not so distant history with disastrous effects. And unfortunately, we're seeing it play out at the moment too. So we have witnessed within the EU and outside of the EU concerted efforts by a variety of authoritarian politicians, undemocratic movements to undermine our democracy by attacking the rule of law and the institutions that underpin the rule of law. And that in itself represents a systemic threat to our democracy and, of course, to the existence of the European Union itself. Because if the European Union is not able to defend and safeguard the rule of law within its boundaries, its legitimacy and its ability to project those values abroad will be severely compromised. Now, the other aspect that I want to underline, and I think that approaches more the things that you have discussed in your presentation, Marco, is how the link between the attack on the rule of law and the resurgence of corruption as a model of governance in many countries as well. Because by weakening the ability of the independence of the judiciary and the sanctity of the legal body upon which a state operates, by weakening those two, political parties, political leaders have then the ability to also corrupt the economic foundations of a country and exploit the resources of that country for their own benefit. And again, this is something that we have seen happening recently, not least in Hungary, where the ruling regime there has put in place a system that in effect enables a select group of people close to the political elites to enrich themselves and benefit, among other things, from EU funds. But that's not something recent. This is something that we have seen over a long period of time in a variety of EU member states, including the one that I come from, where the weakening of the judiciary has been instrumentalized as a way to institutionalize in many ways corruption and ensure that the resources of the state, whether they are homegrown or in the form of EU funds from the European Union, they become hijacked in effect by political elites and their business connections with the sole benefit of enriching those connections, but also locking in the control of the state by certain political parties. So the issue of corruption, apart from the economic consequences and the huge losses that it generates for an economy, also has a very strong political dimension, because it funnels funds that are aimed for society at large, especially groups that are vulnerable or in need of assistance, funnels those funds towards the hands of certain political elites and their business friends, who then use that to impose themselves on that particular state. Now, as a last thing, perhaps I would like to talk about, what is our role here, both as the trade unions, civil society, EU institutions. I think, obviously, first and foremost, the European Commission, but also the European Parliament can play a huge role as watchdogs, both by monitoring how EU funds at least are spent, but also by ensuring that the fundamental values upon which the EU is based, including the sanctity of the rule of law, are safeguarded, defended, and strengthened. And the Commission has taken significant steps in that regard, which of course haven't yet produced the desired results, but I think it's important to acknowledge the difficulties within which the Commission is operating. Nevertheless, both the trade unions, civil society, especially in the context of the Conference on the Future of Europe, have made very ambitious proposals about how to strengthen the instruments at the disposal of the European Commission to ensure that it's able to defend the rule of law and democracy at large. So the institutions have a big role to play, but then I think trade unions and civil society also have a big role to play. Starting off with trade unions, you're an integral part of the economy of all member states, both at the local, regional, and national level, but also, of course, at the European level. And the way that the trade union movement is embedded into every economic aspect of every financial and monetary aspect of our economy, it positions you in a crucial manner to ensure that you can also function as a watchdog in that regard. And that role of watchdog can also be played by civil society. Both those civil society organizations that are active in the areas of combating corruption or defending the rule of law and democracy at large, but also those civil society organizations that work with vulnerable groups or work on issues like environmental protection and social protections. Because again, the more money that are wasted on corruption, the less resources are available for the intended targets of that financial support. So I think there is an imperative need here for cross-sectoral cooperation to ensure that the values that the European Union is built upon are respected, that the mechanisms that we have in place to defend those values are properly used, and they are complemented and strengthened by new mechanisms. But above all, that all of us remain in close contact using those mechanisms, not least the semester, to ensure that those with ill intent, those that wish to compromise our democracy, undermine the rule of law, and hijack public financial resources in the context of corruption are stopped. These are my first reflections and reactions, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with the rest of the panelists and, of course, all your guests. Thanks again for this very interesting discussion.